Right, well, welcome everybody to the information session on the Facilitation Impact Awards. My name's Julia Donoghue. I'm the project leader for the awards this year. Just for those of you who might be joining us that aren't members of the International Association of Facilitators, the association is a professional association which sets internationally recognised industry standards for facilitation. In keeping with our mission to grow the community of practice, we hold the Facilitation Impact Awards every year. The purpose of this session is to give you the opportunity to get some information about the awards and to find out how to nominate. What we'll cover is a little bit of information about the awards, which I'll take you through. And then I'd also like to welcome Christina Hogan, who's the CEO and facilitator from Lawrenceburg's AB. And Christina was a 2016 Platinum awardee, and she's agreed to speak with us today to give us some reflections on the process. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Christina will give us an overview of her project, and then we'll go to a question and answer session. We would like the session to be interactive, so please feel free to ask a question as we go through. We'll do a quick wrap up at the end, and I'd also, if possible, like to just do a quick poll at the end to gather some information on this session so that we can improve any that we run in the future. About the awards, the purpose of the awards is to promote positive impact of facilitation and reward organisations that use facilitation and also recognise excellence in facilitation. One of the other things that we achieve from running the awards is to provide evidence of the power of facilitation. It's open to organisations of any size, from the business, not-for-profit and government sector. And the important thing to note is that the nomination has to come from an organisation that uses and benefits from facilitation rather than firms that provide facilitation services. Facilitators are included in the organisation's submission, and if the submission is successful, both the organisation and the facilitator receive the award. All eligible submissions that score 70 points or more receive an award, and you can see there the scale from 70 points is silver, 80 plus points is gold, and platinum is 90 plus points. We don't put the scores or the submissions on a normal distribution or anything, and there's no limit to the number of awards that can be made. So anyone that receives 70 points will receive an award. The criteria, because the purpose of the awards is to gather evidence of the impact of facilitation, it's not surprising that the most points, 55 in total, are allocated to organisation impact. And within that 55 points, 25 points are given for quantified results. So they're results that have been measured in some way. And 15 points for qualitative results. So qualitative results are results that the client accepts have been delivered, but that they haven't been measured or quantified in some way. We also give 15 points based on the extent of the impact. So that's the extent to which it impacted the organisation and also whether it impacted anybody outside the organisation. The other major point categories for facilitation quality. That's assessed against the International Association of Facilitators core competencies, and there's 24 points available there. The other criteria is facilitation use. So that's about the role that the facilitator played in the project and the amount of time that their involvement in the project was devoted to facilitation activities as opposed to other services that the facilitator may have been providing. There's also 6 points available for the facilitator's professional standing and 3 points available for organisation culture, which is about whether the organisation has an in-house facilitation capability, whether they have access to facilitators and whether they provide any training to staff in facilitation. So all up, there's 100 points available, and as I said, any submission that meets the threshold points of 70 points receives an award. So what I thought I might do is ask Christina to take us through her Platinum Award project from last year, give us a brief overview of that, and then we'll just move into the question and answer session.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. How to start with this project? I can say it like this, that it started very early, maybe even the project was actually done in 2015, but maybe in 2014, the year before, help them develop Lean Six Sigma e-learnings. And they wanted to start on this journey to get everybody in the whole organization involved in, efficiency and thinking of productivity and such like that. So that was the start of this journey. And then it continued on, my relationship kind of deepened with the clients, and they came to me with the next challenge. Okay, now this project is all about Prime Performance. That was the name of the team that worked on this project. And they needed to start thinking about how to lower the claims handling. And a part of the claims handling was that they needed to create a tool and a process to handle claims better for the customer and solve things for good. So they used the backbone of this Lean Six Sigma e-learnings that we developed the years before. And they're not included in this this project, but that's kind of the backdrop. Essentially, this project started with the creating of the tool, and then in these organizations, when an IT tool is created, they often assign right away, like, okay, we need a person that's going to handle training and development, and they kind of slap that label on things, and they get someone in from training and development across the organization to kind of come in and suggest what possibly could be used. And when I was sitting there listening to them, I knew that they were working with change leadership, and I asked them why it had to be training and development and why it couldn't be change and adoption. And I think that was really like a key question for them. Why couldn't it be simply change and adoption? If this tool this IT tool is so intuitive, surely it could be more about how communication happens around the tool rather than about the background, the context. Then is that was maybe the eye-opening part for everybody in the project in the meeting, the initial meeting. I sat with them. So they told me the context and challenges: 150 sites worldwide, managing all the claims, the amount of claims. Unfortunately, I really wanted to include these in the submission, but we weren't allowed to do that. It was very internal and private. But they also, the other thing was that they had tried to introduce a tool years before and a training process around that. So I had all these old materials, and I really wanted to challenge them a little and say, are we really going to grab people in 2 days face to face and tell people where to click? So I challenged and said, let's do this virtually. And they said, no. So we designed everything for face to face in the beginning. And then they came back, and the steering committee said, actually, we're taking away the travel budget now. So yeah, guess what? You get your opportunity here to prove that this could work. So we kind of tagged the slogan. The tool itself was called ACT. And so we said, act with your head, heart, and hands for claims. And we really wanted for people to think through the process. We wanted them to feel the process and be connected with each other. And the hands part is, of course, to use the tool actively. So you can see the project objectives there. Using the one global claims process, introducing the tool, and to use this problem resolutions process. And we wanted to, all the claims super users that were going to roll it out to all their local sites. We wanted them to really take it on and take ownership of it. There were about 150 at the beginning claims super users. So like more or less one per site. And a lot of them were going to cascade the same workshops and such, either face-to-face or virtually, but they got the information virtually. So Yeah, it says there the approach. What we did, we facilitated a workshop which led to an e-learning which described the process. So that was the element, I would say, of training. Maybe that's a good reflection to have when you're thinking about, or if you're thinking about taking this on to submit an award, submit your clients for an award, is to really think through what were the elements that led to the success. So one element here, I would say, is that the change in adoption, shift of focus, and then realizing there is a part of training here, and that's in the tool. So instead of just, or rather not in the tool, in the process. So we did this e-learning about the why the tool is important. So it was a really like not necessarily this is the process 100%, but rather the why part. And then we worked with these workshops that were using tools like De Bono's thinking hats. They had to get with partners and discuss, why this tool, what they know about the tool that's coming, and how they felt about a new tool coming in, and etc. We put them in cross-functional teams. So an order handler almost never meets an engineer that actually handles it. So they work together like that. We put them in those kind of cross-functional teams, and they had to work through a process. So we assigned them a claim, and then for a week we kind of fed them with like, oh no, this went wrong and this went wrong. So you could provide a little simulations along the way. So it was a really like spaced program, and all done. The 3 modules were done. Results. Everybody was really happy, and I think the 2 major reflections the organization had afterwards were the change in adoption, shift in focus, and that reward came back later on when they were shifting from Lotus Notes to Microsoft Outlook. They called directly and said, let's get someone in for change in adoption. So not telling us how to use Outlook. So I thought that was quite amazing. That was, I would say, the result that I'm probably putting in my back pocket that I'm most happy with. And also for them to start thinking of what is training and what is facilitation. So actively working with the power of facilitation, recognizing that power and thinking of other applications for it. So those are the smiling facilitator moments. There's all other great measurable results, and actually the measurable results when it comes to money, the business need, were immeasurable. They haven't been able to really put numbers clearly on. It's the process that helped. It's quite subjective, of course, but the new CEO in place has said like this kind of work has changed fundamentally our approach to our customers and the savings at the end of the day. So I guess the third maybe reflection is the using virtual as a tool, that the organization was very scared, very apprehensive, and I'd say they nailed it. They're using similar processes all over the place. So yeah, those are some of the results. Maybe you have questions that pop up, maybe not.
Thanks very much, Christina. It was great. It sounds quite challenging. Any questions?
Yes, thank you. This is Martin. Thanks, Christine. And congratulations. It's a fascinating case study. I'm curious to know what quantitative data was collected. What were you able to submit as quantitative evidence of impact? Because that's what I wonder about, what my clients might be able to find in the way of quantitative data.
That's probably such a relevant question, because that was a real struggle for the organization. When I put on looking at these awards, when I tried to convince my clients that facilitation was the way to go, the way I really convinced him was like, let's blow this out of the water. Let's prove something here. Let's look at this award. I sent him the information about the award. And he said it was during the summer months to put the award together, or put the submission together. And I worked on it a bit, and he worked on it a bit. And I had put the original quantitative data on, thinking, I used numbers that perhaps were the confidential numbers. That was partly the problem. Numbers were like, this is how many claims we accept over the years, or I mean, through 1 year. This is the amount of time we spend on the claim. And they have all that data, actually. So they had that already in their building up of why this should be a project in the first place. And when I put it on, I didn't know all the numbers. Yeah, I knew some. So I highlighted it in the paper, I remember, in the document, and sent it to him. And he looked at it and he said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We can't possibly let the hard work of the organization, like the hard work of the organization, come up here, because there's no proof that this process really impacted those final numbers. Like, this is the amount of money and such.
Right.
And he was more worried that people would think we're taking credit for what everybody else is working with, because obviously there's people attached to it. So actually it was really hard. So the kind of measurements he wanted to look at, so this was really driven by the client, which I think has more power to it as well, was the engagement of the people. So you can see we did like many different surveys and many different data points with the regional trainers, the claim super users, and then the final participants, so the end users. That was the results that we chose to measure. Then we looked at as well the what were the effects of the word facilitation. So I think we did a poll, like some sort of poll that was like, what are they? It's a borderline qualitative, of course, but how do people define facilitation in the organization? So we counted how many people responded, and we used that as a quantitative measurement. And we used this launch date. It was really important. So they had a go, no go date. And if anybody was if one claim fell on the other side of the date, when the tool switched over, then it would be like, I would say a failure of such. So that was but we spent a lot of time actually looking at these important data points. But I think the question's so important, because had I done it again, or if I was going to do this with the end in mind, right? Because of course we had this thinking in mind in the beginning. And if I look at the documents, or the steering documents, all of that stuff is there, but we were looking more at like much more qualitative work. Like, can everybody explain the problem resolution process? Right. Can, these kinds of things. Do people call each other to make sure the process works?
So, Christina, would you, in that process of, you, for example, would you have gathered measurements of the number of people that can explain the process?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that becomes a quantified measure in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really funny. I would say in some ways, when I looked back at the work that I had done, I mean, I'm certified in Kirkpatrick's levels. So I felt like, if anything, I would have leaned back on that, on Kirkpatrick's theories and such. But I hadn't, I used still very, I would say, like not as business oriented objectives. And so I would have done that again. And since then, I think that was a very big lesson to me when I looked at the results, because there are so many great data points, but at the same time, we didn't aim necessarily for those. A lot of times they were the results, the great results, but not necessarily what we were.
I think it's it is one of the things that I think people who nominate do find difficult, Martin, is finding the data. So I've just put up a slide there on organisation impact, and if anybody has submitted in the past, we used to talk about intangible and tangible impacts, And based on the feedback that we've had from evaluators in past years, we've taken a slightly different approach this year, and we've described it as quantified results, and we simply mean there that there's some sort of measure against it. There's some examples there. One of the interesting things, I think, for organisations that might be concerned about publishing raw data, like the number of claims outstanding, is that percentages are quite fine. So you can talk about performance improvements, reductions in times of percentages. So you're not actually giving any raw data away.
Yeah.
That's quite acceptable. And you know, the examples on the right, sometimes what we get are these qualitative statements about the impact or the results, and qualitative statements are fine, but as I showed earlier, the organisation impact criteria is split into 3, and it's the most points attracted for the quantified results, because one of the objectives is to seek evidence of the power of facilitation. And then there's 15 points available for qualitative results, which are not measured. And then the other important thing to point out is that the assessors, the evaluators will actually be looking for those results in terms of the objectives that were defined for the project. So it's very important in your submissions in section 2 in the project overview to clearly define the organisation that's in scope, and by that we mean, for example, you could have a huge organisation and the facilitator may have been engaged to work with one division or a section within the organisation. So in the submission form, we actually ask people to define the organisation in scope, because when we're assessing impact, we assess the extent to which the organisation was impacted, and we mean the organisation that's in scope, not necessarily the your whole organisation if it's a multinational or a 3,000 person organisation. The other thing is to just really clearly state the purpose of the objectives, so that when the evaluators are looking at the results, they can actually look at them in the context of what it was that the person who's initiated, the client, can sort of say, well, I engaged a facilitator to achieve this objective, and that's what they'll be looking for as to whether that objective was achieved.
Thank you, that's helpful. I absolutely appreciate why the quantifiable impact is so important and has such a high weighting, but it is for the same reason it's the most difficult part to gather the evidence of, I think. Particularly in my case, I mostly work with smaller organizations or smaller parts of organizations, which are much less likely to have the capacity to to gather quantifiable data, least of all on occasional facilitation interventions.
Yes.
But I think your comment, Chris, about thinking of the impact award in advance of the facilitation and designing it in such a way that you know what data you want to collect and you collect it through the process, that would be the way to do it. I was thinking of applying for something I've already done, but actually it might be a bit difficult to do it that way now.
Yeah, and it's I think the structure of it was the structure of thinking through the impact award is such a great project structure anyways.
Yeah.
I think that was really because I'm thinking of it more like every time I start up a new process, I always read through the questions again on the submission. So I can start thinking of how to organize this, and not for the ability to get a new award, but rather it's a really fantastic structure to think through.
It is, and it's a great discipline actually to think not only of what's going to satisfy the client, but also what's going to have a verifiable impact.
Yeah.
if I may add something from Portugal and from the Portuguese community, we just started communicating IAF in this community for already 6 months, only 6 months. And indeed, the reaction from people about the awards is, okay, now I know how to build a case for next year's nominations, because I wasn't so much prepared to gather all the information required. And some even told me that, you know what, getting back to this client to ask about it, now I'm missing the opportunity, because either people change or something like that. So now I think that the structure of nominating now gives us more guidance and also helps people to even be better in building the case for facilitation, which is wonderful, right?
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste. I think it's a good point, and I've just put a slide up there, which is really, I suppose, one big top tip is to nominate at the right time. So getting that clarity about the project objectives and getting that up front. Design your facilitated processes, run your processes with your client, and then measure the impact. And under the eligibility rules for the awards, at least one facilitated process and the results must have been achieved within 24 months of the submission closing date. So if you've had a facilitated process but you haven't had time, or the organisation hasn't had time to actually implement the actions required to deliver those results, sometimes it can be better, as Celeste just mentioned, to consider nominating in the next year once you've actually had the opportunity to deliver the results and gather the data. I've got IAF Global with a hand up for a question.
Oh, sorry. That's Mara, probably.
Oh, hi, Mara.
Hi, I'm from Toronto. I joined late. My apologies. I'm in the middle of the course, so I will stay for a bit. But I also wanted to add that the idea of talking to your clients about what value they're going to get out of facilitation also helps you build your client business relationships, because if they say, oh, that's how much you charge, you'll say, well, that's an investment, because you're going to get these outcomes measurable. So if you get them started talking at the beginning of the engagement, that helps them see the value, and it helps you both to, as you said, I'm just echoing what you said about co-creating your process and building in measurements throughout. It also helps yourself in your relationships with them, just to see that you both can get those outcomes. If you know what they are at the beginning.
It is one of the actual competencies is to sort of have that clear engagement up front with the client, and even if you're an internal facilitator, you still need to go through that sort of contracting process to be clear about what the purpose of the facilitation is, so that you can design the right process to deliver that for the client. So very important. Any other questions?
I just had a thought looking at this picture, actually. It's just thinking of when the celebration happens. Of course, when it's a really bizarre for me with this award, is that I won the award. I have a 1-year-old at home. I wasn't able to come to the ceremony, and my client wasn't either. And so we sat with these awards being really proud, and at the same time not really having the vehicle at that moment to really celebrate. And I thought that was a shame. That momentum kind of was like that sort of feeling rather than scaling upwards. So we had to get that momentum back, because of course we wanted to share things. So we shared, I think we were given the awards in October, and I think we finally came out with it in both of our organizations later on, like in January or such, with newsletters. But I mean, thinking through from the beginning of how you would celebrate, it's such a beautiful question, and it's actually has a lot of value, because if you don't have that plan, then life happens and you're not able to celebrate as you would have liked.
Well, Christina, I was actually at the AMINA conference when you we watched a video of you accepting your award remotely. And
yes, I remember.
And you might not have felt the celebration, but we did. It was a fantastic video. We all thought it was great. So we were all
that's
cheering.
nice to hear. I was actually, when I was filming myself, I felt really teary. You think like, because I mean, and it's not necessarily the project, it's being among people that you really respect and them giving you the amount of points for your work. It's like evaluated by the community. And I think that is such a beautiful strength of this program. It's not like, I mean, you know, a group of people that are so far away from the, able to look and to evaluate and think through, and you don't, you know, it's very anonymous and confidential. So it's a very fair and reliable process, I'd say, that was set up for this.
It's a peer assessment process, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I do have a slide on evaluation, so I'll just quickly touch on that. It is essentially volunteers that do the evaluation. They're all required to complete training, declare any conflicts of interest, and they also undertake to evaluate fairly and consistently. And I suppose what that means in practice is that, you know, evaluators seek to understand a submission, so the clearer and more concise you can be in submissions, the better. We do have, if you can nominate this year, thanks to the work of Celeste and others, and Laurent, who's on the call, you can actually submit in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And we also seek evaluators who can evaluate in those languages, but still good, clear, concise submissions are great. And we actually encourage the evaluators to score the maximum points possible using the scoring framework. And the scoring framework is set out in the Facilitation Impact guidelines. Most of the evaluators have a number of years' experience as an evaluator. But they are essentially peers. You can assume that all of the evaluators understand what facilitation is, so that's the sort of audience that you're writing for. There's at least 3 evaluators independently score each submission, and the submission is scored just on the average of those scores. If there's a wide spread in the scores, so if the spread between each evaluator in the number of points they've allocated is greater than or equal to 15 points or more, we ask the evaluators to actually have a discussion and understand the rationale for why they've each scored the submission that way. Then the evaluators are given another opportunity to score the submission again, and the submission is given the average of that second round of scores. That's how that process works. Any other questions, Mara? You've still got your hand up. Have you got another one there, or?
Sorry, no, that's from before.
Oh, okay, fine. That's all right. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay. I might just quickly show you, I'm not sure. So just as I might have mentioned earlier, we have revised both the submission form and introduced a new document called the Facilitation Impact Award Guidelines. So just so you notice, the section 1 and 2 of the submission form is sort of preliminaries, gathering information about nominees, and as I mentioned before, section 2 is the project overview, which is essentially a high-level summary of the project, and that's the information that would appear on the website if the award is successful. So we recognise that there might be some duplication between section 2 and the rest of your submission, and that is okay. Section 3 is where you actually make statements referencing the award criteria, and for each criterion we actually show the number of points that are available, specify the criteria, and then in these grey text boxes we give guidance as to what the evaluators are actually looking for, what sort of information you should provide there. And then in the Facilitation Impact Award guidelines, we might provide a bit more explanation about that. So, for example, there are examples of quantified results. So, percentage reduction in costs, complaints, processing times, waiting times, as I mentioned before. That's one way that you can disclose in the submission, you know, some evidence without actually giving away any commercial in confidence or information that the client might not want to disclose. You also have the option in the last section of the submission form to nominate sections of the submission material that you consider to be confidential. And if you do that, then the onus is on us to make sure that actually isn't disclosed outside of the evaluation team and the evaluators. Importantly, down the bottom here, you can see for this one, this is the scoring framework that the evaluators will use. So this essentially says if no quantified results were provided or the quantified results demonstrate that only a limited contribution was made to the project objectives, the guidance for the evaluator is there that you'd score 4 of a possible 25 points. So for each criteria in the award, the guidelines provide this information and then set out the scoring framework that all the evaluators will use. And as I mentioned, they all do participate in training, and in that training we go through worked examples. It's very practical training, and people are asked to score, and then we discuss why there are differences in scores. So very important to read the Facilitation Impact Award guidelines before you submit. The only other thing I'd like to mention about that is that facilitation quality, as I mentioned, it is assessed against the International Association of Facilitators core competencies. Now, I think again, the Facilitation Impact Awards guidelines explain what those competencies are. The important thing to note is that you should address them at the sub-competency level. So the form helps you do that by setting out here, for example, A, create collaborative client relationships. That's worth 4 points out of a possible 24 in total for this criteria. But then that's the competency level, and then underneath that there's A1, A2 and A3. So there are 3 sub-competencies associated with that competency. And then you can see down here in the scoring framework that if you don't adequately address any of them, it's 0. If you address one of them, it's 1 point, 2 points. And if you address all 3, it's 4 points. So simply making sure that you address each of these headings in the submission form is a good way of making sure that you're maximising your opportunity to attract points in that section. Another thing to note from the reviews that we've done of previous submissions is that a statement like a working partnership was developed with the client isn't really adequate. Adequately addressed means that the information in the submission sets out how that competency was practiced. So, for example, if you said the key steps taken to develop the working partnership with the client were to, and then just list some of the steps that were taken. And you can see in the guidelines the behaviours that are published on the IAF's website that support each of these competency are all listed, and all of that information is in the guidelines. So it's very important to, I suppose it's that balance between making sure that you're providing the right information as concisely as possible, but particularly in this section of the submission form, it's really important to provide evidence-based information against the criteria and to make sure that you address every heading. Any other questions that we can help with, or?
Thank you very much. That's been very informative, very helpful.
Good. Yeah. Laurent, anything from you?
No, that's okay. It's yeah, it's good information for potential French customers or clients who would like to submit, to be very clear about the requirements.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, just to...
I have a question. Oh,
yep, sure,
sorry.
Celeste. Yep, no. Oh,
It's
Mara,
Mara.
sorry. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry. Because I had to come, I was late. The slide at the beginning where you summarized the winning a project. Are you able to submit a slide like that as an attachment to the application, or is that something you've done afterwards for promoting the power and the winning and etc. for this thing, so that you can get that conciseness? So it's not
So it's
not only in addition to filling out the application form itself in the sections it's supposed to be.
So in the information that's displayed there on that slide is an example of the sort of information that we would be seeking in section 2 of the submission form. So this information on this slide comes from the website where we publicise awardees, and it's a slightly condensed version of that. But it's the sort of information, it's exactly what we're looking for in section 2 of the submission form.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I would suggest that you just include it in section 2 rather than attaching another page, because the other thing I should mention is that the total number of pages in your submission can't exceed 12, and that's because evaluators have quite a few of these to read, so keep them within that 12-page limit. Okay, so if there are any other questions, happy to take them. If not, there's a bit of a summary there. So nominate at the right time. That measurement is very important. And as Mara mentioned, for me, that's sort of part of your contracting with your client. Sometimes that can be challenging, especially if they're small facilitations that you might not be doing, which are part of a sort of a broader project. Read the Facilitation Impact Award guidelines, make sure you understand the criteria and pay attention to the scoring framework, address each criteria, address the information that's in those grey shaded text boxes, and most importantly, make sure that you address the core competencies at the sub-competency level and provide specific examples rather than generic statements. Another good tip, I suppose, is to ask someone to review your submission. Sometimes it's good to write it. I mean, as Christina mentioned, the sort of to and fro between her and the client, and then ultimately, you would have come together, I assume, Christina, and finalised it. But I think sometimes you can get too close to a document. So it's sometimes good to give it to a fresh reader and ask them to read it. The only counsel I can give you there, though, is make sure that they're not a member of the Facilitation Impact Awards project team or an evaluator. Now, I should also mention that evaluators, under our governance policy, evaluators are eligible to submit for an award. However, we have mechanisms in place to make sure that they can't evaluate their own submission, and they're also required to declare any conflict of interests. Well, thank you very much, Christina, for joining us today, and it's been a pleasure, and looking forward to receiving another submission from you.
Yeah, thanks so much for this. It was great to share a big woohoo. Thanks so much.
Yeah, we certainly enjoyed that big celebration at the AMENA conference last year. It was great, wasn't it, Martin?
It was.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, I'll be there this year. Thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
It's in Paris, I think, this year, isn't it?
Yeah, I've already booked a ticket. I'm there.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, it should be a fun event, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Great.